Hi everyone, welcome to the DV Podcast. I'm Matt Saintsing. Today we're diving into an overlooked chapter of Marine Corps history. My guest today is Chaz Henry, author of Fuji Fire, Sifting Ashes of a Forgotten U.S. Marine Corps Tragedy. The book chronicles the 1979 true story about a fire that broke out at Camp Fuji, Japan, killing 13 and injuring 60 others. Chaz, thank you so much for being with me today.
I appreciate the invitation, Matt. Thank you.
So, what is Fuji Fire about, and when did you first hear about this tragedy?
So I first heard about it in 1979 when it happened. I had been at Camp Fuji in early 1978 for a month or so as our 31st Marine Amphibious Unit dumped all the troops there. We did a month of training and left. So I knew the camp. I was back in Hawaii, where I was based in 1979, when we got word of this terrible tragedy with a very high peacetime casualty figure.
Yeah.
I mean, Vietnam is still in people's memory, and suddenly, years have gone by, war has abated, and suddenly we have this incident in which 73 people are injured. And it was just shocking. It was a kick in the gut. So that was my first, exposure to it. I read some, short newspaper articles or message traffic, something like that. Then years go by, many years go by, and I thought everybody sort of had this same recollection. So did a career in the Marine Corps, did a career in journalism, retired from that, and in 2020, I'm posting old photos. It's during the pandemic, there's not a lot to do.
I remember, yeah.
Posting old photos on Facebook, and I posted a number of photos, one of which was me at Camp Fuji in 1978, and I mentioned just in passing, this was about a year before the big fire there. And I was shocked at the number of people, Marines who had been in the Marine Corps even in the 1980s and had trained at Camp Fuji, posting, "What fire? What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
And then I was embarrassed to realize that a buddy of mine, a fellow I'd known since 1981, we met at Camp Lejeune, posted to that. He said, I escaped one of those burning huts. And I had never known that about him.
Oh, wow.
And we'd been friends over all these years. So what happened, 1979, a super typhoon, to this date, still the most intense, largest typhoon ever recorded.
I was surprised by that.
Yeah, super typhoon tip, ranged across the Pacific. It went over Honshu, the main Japanese island. There was a ramshackle little Marine Corps training camp right at the base of Mount Fuji. And what this allowed was a big open space where Marine infantry units could train with artillery firing over them, mortars. You could have tanks operating around the infantry. So it provided a lot of training that you couldn't do as easily on Okinawa. So these troops, this was a satellite training area for the Marine Command on Okinawa,
Gotcha.
though it was on Honshu. So Marines would come up from Okinawa weeks or months at a time, and they would practice these maneuvers. Super typhoon tip blew over. There was some fuel that had been stored in rubberized fabric fuel bladders uphill of where Marines were living in ramshackle Quonset huts.
Yeah.
The huts were heated by open flame kerosene heaters. And water accumulated above a berm. There was a large berm that stood between, an earthen berm that stood between the fuel bladders and the hill that went down to the Quonset huts. But in one day, they got more rain than they would typically get in a month.
Oof.
That water accumulated behind the berm and created a breach. So a 15 to 20 foot breach occurred in the berm. And water rushed through. It lifted the rubberized fabric bladder that held gasoline up. It flowed into the breach of the berm. It was attached by hoses to pumps that were on top of the berm, each one weighing 1.5 tons. The hoses remained connected, and they pulled the pumps down into this breach also. The edges of the pumps were very sharp, and it sliced a 5-foot rip into the gasoline bladder. 5,500 gallons of gasoline flowed downhill, floating on top of the water, downhill into the huts, which were already flooded with water. The gasoline came in and vapors rose, and then ignitions began. And whoomph, whoomph, whoomph. It's, you can imagine, when there's too much lighter fluid on a barbecue grill, expand that and then include it in a contained space, with this circular metal top. 73 people were injured, of whom 13 would eventually die. 54 of the injured suffered burns.
Wow.
And this was in a remote rural part of Japan. The Marines at the camp had no internal firefighting capability. Okay. They relied on the Japanese. When fire inspectors came through from Okinawa, they said, this is not really an optimal situation. You have a lot of people crammed into these huts. There's not a lot of room to move around. What do you do if a fire happens? And they said, well, we have a handshake agreement with the local Japanese firefighters. There's a Japanese military camp just across the road. They had some firefighting capability, and then there, in the town nearby, there were firefighters. This tested that handshake agreement.
Yeah.
The firefighters responded, but they had never been allowed onto the camp before this. So they had no idea where hazardous material was, where buildings were, where access to water was, what the construction of the buildings constituted. And so they did as best they could. They came quite quickly. They weren't told, though, that it was a fuel fire. The people who called them likely didn't know.
Yeah.
So they showed up with water, which is not what you really want to use when you're fighting a fuel fire.
Right. Yeah, crazy. I think that some things that surprised me here from the book. One is that where these Marines lived was made of pine, essentially. It was a wooden structures.
Right. They were wood frame with the corrugated metal on top. And everybody at the time thought about Gomer Pyle USMC, which was an old TV show. I think people today won't even remember that, unless, I don't know, TV Land maybe, or it's been back. But you've seen, but you still see Quonset huts. Sometimes people use them as garages or outbuildings. But these were old. They hadn't been there a long time, but they were sort of World War II era that had eventually ended up there because the Marines, in the 50s, when the Marines started occupying it, they actually just would go and put up tents.
Yeah. The way you describe Camp Fuji here, I think as an Army veteran, an Army analog would be the Joint Readiness Training Center at Fort Polk, Louisiana, or the National Training Center in California, where units go and essentially deploy for a field exercise. And the buildings are already there, and infrastructure is already there. But there's not a whole lot of assigned permanent personnel in these locations that kind of have this expertise. And it is very shocking, from the first days of the military, you learn about fire guard, how important it is to, keep someone awake, to make sure the fire, this goes back centuries, right? How was that forgotten in this case?
Well, it was very rudimentary, and the fire alarm system was, the fire watch was given a triangle. The musical instrument, this
dinner's ready,
and a little, it's called a beater, the little thing to go ding, 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 and yell fire. This was the system. It wasn't anticipating a fire on the scale of what happened on October 19th, 1979. There were also some 55-gallon drums filled with water, the idea being that, you could have a bucket brigade throwing from that. Fire inspectors pointed out that, in the winter this is going to freeze, and if you have a fire in the winter, it's not going to help much. But the fire prevention apparatus and systems were pretty rudimentary and not up to a disaster of this scale.
And you spent time at Camp Fuji yourself, as you said before. So how did your personal connection shape this project?
Well, I wondered where fuel was stored when I was there. But I did come to realize through the investigation that at least for 3 years prior to this incident, fuel had been stored elsewhere. It hadn't been stored directly above the camp. The movement of the fuel bladders to that point happened with the battalion that was there just before 2nd Battalion, 4th Marines. 2-4 was the battalion that was impacted by the fire.
Yeah.
And a unit had come in, a logistics support unit had come in, and a decision had been made that you could put the bladders up there. And in fact, the commander of that unit had been there 10 years before. His boss had told him, put the bladders up there. And the rationale was it was alongside a road that was above the camp, and all vehicles headed out on that road, or guys marched on that road to get out to the training areas. So vehicles could go by, you could fill up, and then head out to the training area. So there was an efficiency that came with that. You didn't have to, if you were to put the bladders on flat land, which was arguably safer, you would have to go downhill, fill up, go back up. These are all dirt roads, no paved roads in this camp. And so you're churning up the asphalt, or rather the volcanic ash of the dirt roads. You're raising dust. You might risk hitting Marines because everybody's walking around in this camp. So that was the rationale for putting it up there. Interestingly, at the very same time, though, U.S. Army fuel handling regulations said that never put fuel storage area above where people are billeted or where a fuel spill might flow into water.
I'm glad you brought that up. It's right there in the book, absolutely.
The Marine Corps regulations at that time did not say that. And so the placement met the regulations that the Marine Corps had in place at the time, but were not up to what was required when this unprecedented storm hit.
I think the way the book opens in the burn ward, these Marines, I think something that is particularly haunting and harrowing is at this time in Japan, it is very hot, right?
Cool.
It's cold. It's cold.
Right.
Okay. Well, I remember there in the one Marine was injured with burns. In there, had heaters around him,
right? Because
he no longer had skin to keep the heat within.
When you think about it, that makes perfect sense, but we don't often think about it.
No, absolutely not.
So a thing that I learned, and I dealt with a lot of surgeons who specialize in burn treatment in the course of researching the book. Our skin is our largest organ. Mm-hmm. The skin is actually an organ, and it's, besides keeping the blood inside us, it plays a huge role in our temperature, body temperature control. And so when these guys lost this outer surface cover, they became very cold. So they're in San Antonio at the U.S. Army Burn Center on Fort Sam Houston.
Yep. And
it's warm there because by the time they got there, it's still quite warm in San Antonio. And even with that, it's air conditioned inside, but in the burn ward, they kept the burn ward particularly warm. You're talking about temperatures in the 90s. Raised humidity maybe to 80%.
Wow.
And even in that context, they're also bringing heat lamps to the side of the bed because these guys are just so cold.
Yeah, that was the image that really stuck out for me. And terrible. You spoke to some of the Marines who were there, survivors, and of course the families of those who perished. Was there a particular story that really stayed with you or that really jumped out as...
Well, there's the story of one Marine, Isaac Williams from Alexandria, Louisiana, who, of the survivors, was the worst burnt. And it suggested that he had burns over 90% of his body.
Wow.
In the ICU, once they were able to get to San Antonio to the burn ward, he was in what's called a striker bed, which allowed a person to be held between these devices that held you in place, and you could be turned without having to move you off of a mattress and such, just so that your body wouldn't be hurt, your skin wouldn't be more damaged as you were being turned. So Isaac is in one of these. He's just horribly burned. There are 16 beds in the ICU. And Isaac is the one guy, and the Marines are all trying to figure out who's there. Okay, because they know each other. They're almost all from the same company.
You couldn't recognize them, probably, some folks couldn't.
Right.
Yeah.
And in many cases, the guys can't see. They're ventilated, but people are calling out, so they kind of know who's there. So every day, Isaac is asking the other guys, "How you doing?" And he's motivating this. And I heard this from other Marines. I heard this from Army nurses and doctors. That this guy is just so, his eyes had been fused, had been burned shut, his eyelids. He asked the doctors to cut his eyelids off so that he could see. He didn't want to be blind. This just gives you an idea of the straits that he was in. And he was the one who every day was encouraging and motivating the other guys in there. And Isaac went on to, it was a long medical journey. So when people recover from burn injury, it's not like other injuries. So you're released from the hospital, and then you really just sort of start a recovery process that might last even 3 years before you can really start to consider yourself, on a road to recovery. It just takes that long, and sometimes it even takes that long to get to a point where you're going to have reconstructive surgery for cosmetic reasons. All this other stuff is just keeping you alive up to that point. And so Isaac goes through that, goes home, gets married, has a family. When I became acquainted with him in 2020, 2021, he was commander of a VFW post. He was president of the church choir. He was in the leadership of a church, and just the same positive guy that I had heard about from all these other people. Just the fortitude. You have to ask yourself, where does that come from? Now, he has a very strong religious faith that was evident even as he was burned. And he told me about, rushing through these walls of fire, because as as the gasoline on top of the water flowed down through the camp, it's all on a slow downhill stretch, it would ignite and 15-foot curtains of flame would rise, and they might even be moving. And so leaving the hut, he had to run through these. He was terribly burned, and he felt the presence of Jesus reaching out to grab him. He grabbed the hand pulled him through the fire, and he said it wasn't Jesus, it was a corporal that he had not gotten along well with, who had pulled him out of these flames. And having this faith that carried him through, the presence of his mother, had a very strong family, and his mother stayed with him the entirety of the time he was, this long period of time he was in the hospital afterwards. It was striking, and it was just, Marine Corps fortitude personified.
Did anyone get any awards for saving people during this? Were there any recognition?
There were some, and in fact, this may have been, because records weren't kept, it's not clear, but a release from Headquarters Marine Corps suggested that there might have been more Navy and Marine Corps medals issued for this incident, and that's it's like the Soldier's Medal. It's
for doing good.
Right,
Yeah.
but not against an enemy.
Right.
And for life-saving.
Yeah.
Life-saving, where your life is also at stake. And there were quite a number. There were of Marines. But the awards, I think people who are in the military today will look, and in the book there's a record of those who I could document, of the awards that I could document. I'm sure that it's incomplete, but I documented as many as I could. People will look at that and they'll say, the Navy doctor, who was the only physician on the camp, and for most of the period while the fire was burning, is coordinating the medical effort, months later got a Navy Achievement Medal. Corpsmen, there were 30 corpsmen, most of them just out of medical corps school, who were treating these terribly burned. They got meritorious mast, which I think is one step above a letter of commendation.
Nothing you can wear in your uniform.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So that was partly the Marine Corps of the time, but there was also the fact that I think commanders worried if we give out a lot of awards, something terrible happened. Does it look like we're awarding people? So I think some people who did things that were really worthy of note may not have been recognized because of concern of how will this look if questions are raised about why the fire happened.
That's kind of where I was going at. They don't want to really shine a light on maybe one of the worst peacetime tragedies ever. And let's talk about this. You go into how the Marine Corps handled, or really kind of mishandled, this disaster. What did you uncover about your research what was the institutional response from the Marine Corps?
Okay, well, there are a couple things at play. So few people have heard of this.
Yep.
Principally, it's because 2 weeks later, hostages were taken at the U.S. Embassy in Iran. So that's when there was a huge shift of attention, and people just didn't look back at what had happened in Japan, and this long story that continued then with guys going through medical treatment and such, or even looking into questions about why it happened. The Marine Corps itself, I think, took the tack, let's just not talk about this because it will beg the question, why did it happen?
Yeah.
And investigators, shortly thereafter, there was a Marine Corps investigation. I had questions that I raised in the book about who was selected to investigate because the senior investigator had himself conducted a maintenance inspection on the camp subsequent to the fuel bladders being moved into place and not long before the typhoon and fire incident.
Kind of grading his own work a little bit to some extent.
Possibly. Did he have a vested interest anyway, I don't know. But the Marine Corps, I think, took the tack of let's just not talk about it for a number of reasons. So, for instance, Leatherneck Magazine, which is the magazine of the Marines since World War I, never did an article about the Fuji Fire or the Marines who were impacted. 10 years later, they did an article, hey, this is Camp Fuji, and they never mentioned that incident. One of the concerns was sailors and Marines in Okinawa, for some period of time, became very wary about going up to Camp Fuji. And I think they said, we don't want to spook these people, we're going to lose this great training area. And so what one did see in Okinawa was articles about how safety was much improved at Camp Fuji. And the improvements did begin to occur, and I credit that a lot to the Commandant of the Marine Corps at the time, General Robert Barrow, who was deeply impacted by these events. And I can talk about that in a second. But
sure.
soon thereafter, he began making changes, putting money toward improvements at the camp. Before he left office, he had been commandant maybe 100 days before the fire happened.
Wow.
And before he left his office, there was a fire department built and staffed on Camp Fuji, staffed by Japanese firefighters. It exists to this day, and I, a few years ago, had the opportunity to visit that and meet with those firefighters.
Oh, wow.
So improvements did happen. They weren't talked about publicly. And it was an interesting time, too. I think a lot of people won't recall that World War II veterans were not all that proud of Vietnam veterans.
Huh.
And there was a sense that people who served in Vietnam, well, we won our war, you know, you lost yours. And there was a sense there had been issues of recruiting quality. You know, the U.S. populace was not as excited about the military, so it wasn't a prestigious place to go to serve. And so it was interesting because on the one hand, some of the leaders said, you know, this really points up that these Marines are every bit as good as the Marines of World War II. But it also begged the question of, you know, that social interaction between the generations of veterans, of, you know, one looking down on the other. And so I think there were concerns about, let's just not talk about this and let's do what we can to improve it. That was in the long run. There were some other people who I thought might have tried to, you know, push aside concerns about what we had done to maintain the camp or not maintain the camp up to that point.
So let's talk about how you wrote the book. I mean, 4 years of research, archival research, interviews. I mean, I have to imagine you went to Japan and back many times. What were some challenges or surprises that you uncovered in the course of working on this project?
The biggest challenge was finding people. So I was looking for something to do. I'd retired from daily journalism right before the pandemic, so I was stuck at home. I'd had some health issues that keep my immune system suppressed, and so I had to be careful about going out. So I was kind of stuck at home. My wife and I, we would go out hiking and such, but not a lot of social interaction. So I'm looking for something to do. So this comes up, the incident with, you know, my posting the photo and people being shocked by people not remembering it. So I said, well, maybe there's a podcast here or something. I'll start looking into it. And so the first challenge was, you know, I did what searching I could online. There wasn't a lot out there. The Navy JAG actually had, though on its, I don't know if it's still the case, but on its website, the homepage, they had maybe 10 investigations that you could get a copy of. And it struck me as maybe these are the most requested. And one of them was the Camp Fuji investigation. So I downloaded that. It was highly redacted, a lot of material crossed out. But shortly thereafter, a friend of mine, and the way these things fell in place told me this had to be meant to be. This friend of mine in 1986 had done a Freedom of Information Act request, thinking that he was going to write a book about this. He's Charles Henderson, well-known author, wrote the book Marine Sniper. But he couldn't interest a publisher. So that had sat by the wayside as he wrote a number of other books. He and I talked about this. He said, well, I got, you know, 3/4 of an inch of photocopy material. I'll send it to you. And among that was an almost non-redacted copy of the investigation. Between the two that I had, I was able to reconstruct page by page until I had a completely non-redacted copy. Principally what that gave me was names, because names had been all crossed out. So then I was able to, unfortunately not everybody was Bob Jones or Fred Smith, and I was able to use these search engines, people finder search engines, and I spent a lot of money on postage. And I would find a name, and I might find 5 people that could be, you know, seemingly that right age, and I'd send out 5 letters.
Oh, wow.
And so I sent out hundreds of letters, and eventually started hearing back. You know, well, yeah, that was me. And in some cases, oh, I'm still in touch with my buddy. In the end, I was able to interview more than 130 people who were directly impacted by the events.
Wow.
Now that includes Air Force storm chasers who flew into the eye of Typhoon Tip, Marines and sailors who were at the camp, Army and Navy aviators who helped in medevac, and Air Force, and medical people all through the chain, Navy, Air Force, and Army, who helped take care of the Marines. And so the most challenging part probably was finding people. And then I actually had a lot of people, with everybody, because I thought I was still going to do a podcast. I recorded audio interviews, and not being very smart, I didn't use software to transcript to provide transcripts. I went through everything, and part of this is maybe why it took 4 years, but it also helped me get a very good handle on the material. I would pull material and I'd put it just in these document buckets that eventually became chapters, and I massaged through that. Then I went, spent a week in San Antonio at the Army Burn Center and the Army Medical Museums, and saw the building, where the old hospital building where these Marines were treated, and I saw the burn center today, which is just extraordinary.
It is, yeah.
It's amazing, but it's interesting. In the old burn center ICU, they called it the cube. You had 16 beds, and guys could interact. Now, almost every patient has about that same much space individually, but you don't have that interaction. And in this case, that interaction was really useful. Guys keeping each other's spirits up. In the book, there's mention made of as guys got out of the ICU and they're in a regular ward, still, not sure that they're going to live. They were taken every day to this room where they were scrubbed. Second-degree burns still exuded some kind of material that infection loved to get into, and so every day they had to be scrubbed down with this soap and water. Sometimes that clipped off. It was very painful.
Yeah, I imagine.
And Army nurses told me that one thing that they had never seen was Marines getting up out of their beds and walking with their buddy when their buddy was walking to that room to go through it, up to the door, to provide just that support. And I think that was very useful to the recovery of all the guys. So we talk about General Barrow. General Barrow visited the burn center about a week after the fire happened. And a number of interesting things happened. First, he went in and he and the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps went and met with every burned Marine there. There were 37, I believe, at that time. These are of the worst burned. And 2 or 3 Marines who were hooked up to ventilators, they have all these tubes going in and out of their body, got out of bed to stand at attention. And it freaked these Army doctors and nurses out. And they said, oh my God, but they had never seen anything like it. Another doctor, a day after the arrival of the patients, saw these guys with the ventilation sets climb out of their beds and do push-ups.
Wow.
And there was this internal strength, young guys, not long out of recruit training, proud of what they had achieved, what they had become, a lot of it based on, our health and our fitness. And one doctor watched that, a surgeon said, this is amazing. Will these guys, fare incredibly well because of this strength? Sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. Even some of these who, had this strength, infection came in, and it's insidious, and it would take their lives. But the other thing with General Barrow, he met with all the families, quite a number of family members, so probably 60 were there by the time he arrived a week later. Families had come from all over the U.S. to be there with their sons. And there was a lot of anger about what had happened, and a lot of questions that couldn't be answered. The general didn't have answers to exactly what had happened yet. The investigation had not even begun at that point. And he stood in front of the families, and I've spoken to a number of people who were there, family members, Marines, and this is just an incredibly tense environment. And these people were, someone asked who's responsible, who's accountable. And the general said, I guess I'm the Commandant of the Marine Corps, I guess I'm accountable. I'm responsible ultimately. And they just gave it to him. And people said the Commandant's wife was there with him, and tears were streaming down her face in the front of this auditorium where they were holding this meeting. And it may have been cathartic. There was a lot of this anger expressed to the Commandant. Finally, somebody got up and said, this guy has said, these guys are like his sons, and he's going to find out what happened. But it was a very tense situation in which the Commandant took accountability.
Yeah.
He wasn't involved in the design of the camp. He'd been to the camp probably a year before, so he knew what it was like, and he knew the state it was in. He described it as looking as if it had been built by infantry carpenters. So he knew the state of things, but he really did. In the wake of that, he did a couple things. I mentioned before that he started working to make sure that money was put in the budget to replace the building facilities, store fuel underground, and those things happened over a period of 4, 5, 6 years. But the thing he did immediately, and I went through 11 ranks. I was a staff sergeant, warrant officer, retired as a captain. So, I knew about generals, but I had never really given thought to general leadership. What is general leadership? We, at our level, we think tactical and operational. We kind of understand that. The general told every general in the Marine Corps, if you ever travel across continental United States, you're going to stop in San Antonio. And of course, that showed the Marines concern, showed that there was concern on the part of the Marine Corps. But he said, what I wanted was every general to go through there and ask himself, how did this happen? And I thought, that is general leadership.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very early in his tenure as Commandant of the Marine Corps, and a lot of generals did. And a lot of them were very taken aback because it was a difficult environment to go into, given the shock of the injuries that one saw, plus the heat, plus the humidity. And you're also in all this gear, face masks, head covered, to avoid infections. But a lot of guys would have to leave. They'd have to be taken. A nurse would have to escort them to a bathroom to vomit or to cry or just recompose themselves. It was that shocking. So hopefully there was some benefit from that. But I thought that impressed me about General Barrow's reaction.
And General Barrow, was he the World War II veteran, Korean veteran,
yes,
and Vietnam veteran who said what he saw, it was far worse than anything he saw in combat?
Yes, he said he described the Fuji Fire as the worst peacetime disaster of the time he'd been in the Marine Corps, and that was since 1942. And he said that thinking back on it, he said, I've seen a lot of bad things, ugly things in combat, nothing compared to his meeting the Marines who had been injured in the Fuji Fire. The injuries were shocking and distressing.
Yeah. I think there's if you're under someone's command, you're also under their care at the end of the day. You're responsible not only for, executing operations and defeating the enemy, but for making sure that young Marines are taken care of. And I think when I first, halfway through the book, I was like, I'm not sure if the Marine Corps had taken proper care of these guys in sense of, the fuel being at a certain place, and there was no fire brigade. It really wanted to know, who was responsible for this? Who should there be blame? Who shoulders that blame?
So the book raises those questions. Mm-hmm. The investigators I mentioned blamed God, and they said no human involvement. In 1991, when General Barrow was interviewed for his oral history, he said that it wasn't just natural elements. There were human things that had been done. The camp had not been well maintained. Now, this is, tours rotated almost every year there. So that's one of the issues I point to in the book, is that when you're only there for a year, you have a very limited vested interest, and you can only do so much. And units and individuals in each unit were rotating individually. So every month you lost about 1/12 of your people, and you gained another 12. And these sorts of things, to my mind, led to, you can't do much, you don't care, you only care a little bit. And so I think, and then the people who ran the camp, the cadre at the base camp, my sense was they took better care of their compound than the compound that the Marines rotated through to train. For instance, there were almost no fire extinguishers up in the training camp where this incident happened, where units would rotate through, whereas there were a considerable number down at the base camp, where the people who ran the camp day to day and ostensibly, maintained it and scheduled it. So I think readers my sense was that it was a cumulative effect of not enough attention to safety, this rotation system that didn't give people enough time to make a change if they were so inclined, and people in jobs that they might not have been trained for. And this was a time in the Marine Corps where it was building back quality. 5,000 Marines had been kicked out through a program that said, we've got too many chronic troublemakers. Battalion commanders, you can administratively discharge people. So the Marine Corps very quickly got rid of 5,000 people the missions remained the same. So you have fewer people. In some cases, you have people who have been trained on the job because you haven't had a chance to send somebody through a formal school. And so this combination of things, to my mind, is what resulted. But I am curious to hear what readers think. I've tried to lay out as much as I could find from documents and from triangulating people's recollections, and particularly with documents where I could, to explain sort of, the state of the Marine Corps at the time, the Marines to whom this happened, the camp itself, and the incredibly inspiring, if ad hoc, response. Now, this is before the Joint Force. Today, everyone knows about the Joint Force. That was not the case in the late 1970s. Services were pretty insular, and a lot of people from different services came together in this instance, often sort of overcoming, or despite, organization, out of altruism, to do what they could for these Marines. And there's some incredible tangents. I mean, what sustained me for 4 years, as I kept coming upon these stories, the pilot, Air Force pilot who commanded the first of 2 C-141s that took the guys from Japan to Texas, had not flown cargo aircraft his entire career. He was a fighter pilot who was shot down over North Vietnam and had spent 1,917 days as a prisoner of war.
Oh my gosh.
In Hanoi.
Wow.
Had been released in 1973. Here it is 6 years later. He retrained in cargo aircraft, and he said the 2 most important flights of his entire career as an aviator were both on C-141s. One was on the C-141 that picked up the prisoners in Hanoi and took them to the Philippines when they were released from North Vietnam. And the other was carrying these injured Marines from Japan to Texas.
Wow.
And there are a lot of other tangents like that. And I tried to make it a very human story. This is, as a Marine and as a journalist covering defense issues, I've always been of the view that it's not about maps and arrows, it's about human beings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I tried as best I could to learn as much about each individual who was involved in every aspect and kind of present their human story. And I've made some wonderful friends in the course of this, and met some people who were just incredibly inspiring. And this may be I'm pretty sure this is going to be the most meaningful thing I have ever done in my career as a Marine or as a journalist, because this was so tragic, and yet so little remembered. I had an email the other day from a Marine who wasn't involved in the book, but he had read the book, who told me, those of us who were there that day, because this is never mentioned in Marine Corps history, ask ourselves, should we feel ashamed? Implying, did we do something wrong?
Yeah.
Why hasn't the Marine Corps acknowledged this? Interestingly, the Marine Corps Museum just opened its second wing that talks about Marine Corps life from 1976 through present day. And I was kind of excited about going. And in fact, I got a couple of guys who were veterans of this incident, and we went down once it opened, thinking that there might be something about the fire, but there wasn't. So it's been gratifying to formally document something that I think should have been before, and I felt that I was in my position as a Marine, having done a long career in journalism, learned research techniques, and having the time that I could devote to it. It seemed meant to be, and it was a privilege to work on this.
I mean, I loved it. You see the corners are well worn on here because I took it everywhere with me. My last question here is, what do you want readers, particularly veterans, to take away from this book?
That the spirit, while resources and such vary over time in the military, the spirit that animates the people who serve is pretty constant. And I always thought of the Marine Corps, and in my years there were about 175,000 Marines. I call them 175,000 heroes in waiting, people who wanted to do good. And in this case, at a time when the military wasn't well resourced, you look at the Marines, the soldiers, the airmen, the sailors. These people all wanted to do good, and they did to the best of their ability in terrible circumstances. that's encouraging. I think it raises questions that people should ask about accountability.
Absolutely.
In a military setting like this. And I let readers come to their conclusion, and people have come to different conclusions. My sense is that it was a variety of circumstances combined, but who is accountable for something when it's ambiguous, like maintenance over a 4 or 5 year period before something happens? Yeah. And then leadership. There are leadership lessons, and I think there are some that are maybe not as optimal, but when I look at the example of General Barrow, that strikes me as a leadership lesson worth noting. And if you're still in uniform or in any environment where you have the opportunity to help and care for other people, following. Well,
it could definitely be taught at any war college or any of the service academies. I hope they do someday be able to chronicle this amazing tale. Chaz, tell people where they can find the book.
It's everywhere you might be able to find books. So you can find it on Amazon. You can order it directly from the University of Nebraska Press. It's available in hardcover, as a Kindle edition, and as an audiobook. And please buy it.
And when you do, we'd love to hear from you at DAV. We really want to, please reach out and let us know what you think about the book. But Chaz, thank you so much for being here. Again, a pleasure, and hope to have you again sometime.
I appreciate the invitation. And one last thought is, a lot of people, when they think about disabled American veterans, think about people injured in combat. Of course, that's the main reason the organization existed, but in peacetime, we know in training, there are often people that are very seriously hurt and need to be included and revered in the same way. And in this instance, people weren't actually even training. They were at a training site when this just happened to them. But these are forgotten disabled American veterans,
Absolutely.
I think, in addition to having been involved in an incident that was forgotten. So I think it helps people understand sort of this wide continuum of the people that fall into this category.
It's a contribution to the community and to history. So
thank you.
For DAV, I'm Matt Saintsing. Until next time.